In this video, we're going to be reviewing the CZ75 P-01 Omega Compact. I know that's a long name, and it also has a relatively long history of nearly 50 years. Looking back at the history a little bit, if you're not familiar with CZ in English basically stands for Czech Armory and is one of the top 10 small arms manufacturers in the world. CZ USA, the US establishment of it, was established back in 1997 and ultimately moved to Kansas City in 1998. The CZ75 series was first introduced back in 1975, hence the name. And it was introduced as one of the new Wonder 9s that were out there with stagger stack magazines, steel frame, and things of that nature. Now this version is the P-01 Omega Convertible Compact, and this was offered back between 2016 and 2023. Why did they stop offering it? I'll talk about that in a moment. But basically the Omega version was offered with both a decocker as well as a manual safety option. So in other words, and by the way, all my handguns were safety checked before the video. That means you can fire this in double single action mode, or you can, with a decock, or you can carry it cocked and locked like a 1911 by switching out this lever on the Omega system. That's what makes it very versatile and why so many people really like the Omega trigger systems on the P-01. Now, recently, CZ came out with the Shadow 2 version, which basically is a decked out P-01, but they only offer this in, for example, a single action only, and there's no firing pin block, and it basically comes in around twice the price. So you really have to ask yourself, is that a good fit for what you want? And we'll talk about that in a moment. The barrel is a 3.75 cold hammer forged barrel. This is also a hammer fired pistol. So if you're not familiar with hammer fired pistols, basically since the release of Glock decades ago, striker fire systems have become pretty much the norm in the marketplace, right? Single pull, every time, all the time. Very simple, very easy to operate, but has limitations. Some people, however, prefer the hammer fired systems, especially the people who start out with striker fire pistols like a Glock but want to evolve to, for example, more options. Now when you do that, it also requires just a little bit more training and muscle memory, but if you're one of these people like that shoot regularly, this is a great versatile option that you can have that help you go beyond the traditional striker fire models. Now, as I talked about before, the P-01 comes both in the Omega and the standard trigger options. Now, one of the differences here is you're going to see this is a Omega model, which they stopped making last year. The current models that they sell have a little bit more, you can tell them immediately because they have more of a curved trigger, and the internal components of the triggers are just a little bit different. Now, some people like them, and some people prefer the Omega triggers that we have here. I personally like the Omega triggers because the Omega trigger is currently used as well on the 07 and 09 models of the CZs. So why they decided to stop using them on this handgun, I don't know, because personally I prefer this over the standard trigger system. Now, when you buy these, what a lot of people will do is they will make improvements to the trigger and then the spring. So for example, there are spring kits that you can buy, for example, from places like Cajun Gunworks and M Carbo, and they cost around $30, and you can easily change out, for example, your main springs and other springs in here to really get your trigger pulls down to where you want them, because they do come in a little stiff, especially on the double action trigger pulls. Now mine, of course, have already been upgraded. People will also do what are called pro package upgrades, where they basically take a lot of the components, including the hammer, and change them out as well. Other people like me will just simply disassemble the handgun, and then what I'll do is I'll take a Dremel with Flitz polish, and then I'll polish up things like the sear and other things like that to get it really smooth to the point where I really want this. And then the final thing is, you know, some people actually will just send these into Cajun, and they'll have them do all the work for them. So the point is, this is the Omega trigger system, which I really like, but you have options on this as well. I have a link below. If you buy one of these or want to buy one of these and make improvements to the trigger, there's a link below from M Carbo that shows you step by step how to disassemble and reassemble this handgun. And it's one of the best, if not the best, out there on the internet now. Now, if you're generally a handy person, you're comfortable disassembling handguns, I would suggest following that video if you want to make those upgrades, and you can probably do this pretty effectively. If you're not, or you have any hesitation around that, then I would rely on a gunsmith to make these changes for you. So you're going to hear terms, especially around the 01s, when people say, hey, my CZ has been Cajunized, right? And basically what that means is they're either using these Cajun spring parts in the handgun, or they literally send it off to Cajun Gunworks to have a complete trigger job done, which is not cheap to do that. So you have a lot of options there. Mine is technically Cajunized because I have the Cajun springs in here, but I did the trigger job myself. And as a result of that, on my Lyman gauge, I now have a double action trigger pull that comes in just around 6 pounds, which is exactly where I want it. I typically like double action pulls anywhere between 5 and 7 pounds. And then my single action pull comes in perfectly at 1.7 pounds. And that's one of the great things, again, about the double single action system is you have the safety factor of being able to do a short, quick pull and shoot, as well as if you have time to line up a shot or need more accuracy, you have that ability to fire single action shots at distances with a very, very nice trigger pull. Now, looking at a couple other things here as well, they do come with ambi controls on the decocker levers. So when you buy these, especially with the Omega kit, the Omega is going to include the option to swap these out. So you can carry either with the decocking capabilities or cocked and locked like a 1911. Now, as far as the grips, these are rubber palm swell grips. So you can see them here from both the top as well as the side. And these are really easy to change out because, as you can see, there's 2 Phillips head screws that allow you to change these out. And there are a lot of aftermarket grips out here that you can buy, and some of them are really pretty. Some people really don't like these grips. These are the stock grips. I actually don't mind them at all. And even though I might change them out over time, there are options, for example, to do slimmer grips. So some people, if you have a smaller hand, maybe you want a little bit smaller grip. But for most people, that's one of the great things about the SP-01 is that just the feel in the hand are just fantastic. And that's why people love them. Most common replacements you're going to see when you Google them, for example, like VC and lock grips and things like that, make really nice looking grips. And then, again, you can get slim profiles, all types of variations that are out there. As far as the sight system on this handgun, it is a 3-dot white sight with a green night sight. Now, they're not great sights. As far as day sights, day shooting, I prefer to have a nice pronounced white sight like this. And at night, they will green out. The difference is, however, they're not tritium, which means they're not going to stay charged for you. Oftentimes, you need to charge them, for example, with a light before you go out into the dark for them to actually light up green. And I don't know if you can see that in the camera now, but that's what we did here. But if you have this holstered in a dark place and then you go outside, they're probably not going to be showing up like this, right? Because then you have to literally charge them up. So that's why they're marginal as a night sight, but they're really good as a day sight. And quite honestly, I don't really need to change them out because to me, they're actually really, really good sights. Now, as far as weight is concerned, how does this stack up, for example, to some of the most common handguns on the market today? So in this case, the P-01 comes in at 1 pound, 12 ounces. Now let's compare this to, for example, the polymer frame P-09, which I have another review on, that comes in at 1 pound, 11 ounces. So this is just 1 ounce less than an aluminum frame P-01. And then the SIG SP 2022 comes in at 1 pound, 12 ounces. So again, very similar in weight. Now, the only comparison I would put on this table would be, for example, a Glock 19, which is going to be lighter. It's coming in at 1.67 ounces with the light, but without a magazine. It usually works out to around the same weight. So you've got a little bit more weight than, for example, a Glock 19. You're on par with your SIGs and your P-09s, etc. But again, that is the weight of the handgun as it comes in. Now, as far as accuracy is concerned, a comparison to the P-09, which I have another review on as well. So in this case, for example, the 75 P-01 Omega, this is the group that I fired, and this is before I actually made improvements to the trigger. But I had a nice cluster, and again, the gun's going to shoot more accurate than I am, but I just want to give you an idea of what I'm shooting at 15 yards compared to, for example, the P-09C, which I also shot at 15 yards. So they're pretty much on par as far as grouping is concerned as to what I'm able to get accuracy-wise, at least for me, firing this handgun offhand. Now, as far as the slide, one of the things you're going to notice about the CZs that make them very different than other handguns is the slide actually rides inside the frame. So most striker fires and other polymer handguns and other, semi-auto handguns you see, you're going to notice that the slide rides on the frame. And in this case, for example, the CZs are unique in that they're riding inside the frame. And as a result of that, you have less surface showing above the frame, for example, to rack the slide. And this is one of the only knocks that people really have on the P-01 that I hear about, which is, you know what, it's really kind of hard to grab and to cycle the slide because you've got a lot less surface to grab when you're doing that. Now for me, what I prefer to do when I rack it is I prefer to rack it this way. It's just a habit that I have. So a lot of people are used to doing it this way, and you can see where you have a limited grab here. That's why I always prefer, at least for me, when I rack my P-01, I'm always racking with my palm on it and carrying through, and I've never had any problems even with sweaty hands. So again, that's just one of the nuances of the P-01 you're going to notice. Now, as far as disassembly is concerned, one of the things that you're going to need to know about a CZ especially is you need to disassemble a certain way. So what I recommend doing is first off, there's a notch on the slide as well as the frame. And you need to line up those notches together, and then you push through this button right here. And then you're going to pull out the pin, and then you're going to pull this slide forward. So the disassembly is actually fairly easy. It might be a little stiff when you first do this the first time, but basically what this is going to allow you to do is to quickly disassemble it. A lot of times people are used to, for example, wings or takedown levers. In this case, you're just going to need to remember that you need to line these up and then push that through. And one of the little tricks to do this is I recommend taking the magazine, and then when you line up the notches, start your push through with the end of the magazine so you don't really mar up your frame, and then you can pull it out and disassemble from there. One of the things you're going to notice if you get the P-01 is, even though it's been out a long time, there's really kind of limited options in holsters. And the other thing I would mention is, because of the finish on this handgun, I would not recommend using a Kydex holster unless it is lined. The reason why is it's pretty easy to mark up handguns when you have Kydex directly sliding onto for example, the finish of a handgun. And the finish here is actually really nice, and I wouldn't recommend doing that. In this case, if you're going to get a P-01, I would recommend that you probably get a leather holster that's going to help protect the finish of your handgun. Now, what are some of the things that I like about this handgun? First, as I mentioned before, it is a double single action Omega trigger system. And honestly, I don't know why CZ stopped making these a year ago in the Omega system, because to me, they're still one of the best out there. The second thing I like about this are the ergonomics. I have an average size hand, and this feels just absolutely perfect in my hand. If you've ever picked up a P-01, you know exactly what I'm talking about. These just feel like they're made for your hand. It's absolutely fantastic. And that's one of the great things about the P-01 that people still to this day claim that this is one of the best, if not the best feeling ergonomic handgun out of the box. Another thing about this are the finishes on this handgun are very, very nice. This is just really a beautiful handgun. Another thing that I really like about these are you can use Mekgar magazines on these. So Mekgar makes a affordable alternative magazine. So these are 15-round magazines that you can pretty easily buy online or in other places, and they will work, and they're just as reliable in this handgun, in my opinion, as these stock magazines, and they come in at a very affordable price. So it's pretty easy to find magazines for these as well. And again, I recommend the Mekgar because Mekgar actually OEMs and makes a lot of magazines for these manufacturers already. CZ prices are also pretty affordable as well. This is an aluminum frame handgun, which means it's more expensive to make this. It's not a polymer frame handgun. So, but for the price that it has out there, it's actually very affordable. Another thing I really like about it is the bore access. It actually has a very nice bore access. Now, one of the things people love about Glocks is you've got a very low bore access, and then contrast that, for example, to SIGs, where you commonly hear people complain about the higher bore access, which means, more potential muzzle flip and things of that nature. In this case, with the 01, I get a very similar bore access to what I have, for example, with my Glocks, which makes it very easy to fire this. Other thing that I really like about the P-01, and if you've ever fired one of these, you know what I'm talking about, is the felt recoil on these are very, very comfortable. These are a pleasure to shoot. And if you've ever fired these, for example, next to even a CZ P-09, you're going to feel the difference. This is absolutely fantastic. And if you're one of these people that just likes to go out and shoot and go to the range and practice and things like that, and you start firing one of these P-01s, you're probably not going to want to fire other handguns because they really are absolutely fantastic. The felt recoil is very comfortable. And then the best thing about the P-01s is they've been around a long time, especially the 75 series. These are extremely reliable handguns. I know people that have been firing these P-01s for over 10 plus years and had tens of thousands of rounds through them, and they absolutely are say that they swear that they are as reliable as Glocks. And all the years that I've been firing this one, I've never had one fail to feed, one malfunction in here. So to me, it's on par with a Glock. Now, what are some of the things that I don't like about this handgun? The first thing is, if you're one of these people that wants to run optics on here, there are currently no optic cuts that are provided on the SP-01. You're pretty much stuck with iron sights on here. Now, recently, CZ came out with basically it's an upgraded decked out model of the P-01. That is the Shadow 2 model, which only comes in single action and has no fire pin safety and things of that nature. And it comes in at twice the price. So you do have that option, but again, there are no optic cuts on this handgun. The stock trigger system is just a little bit stiff. Now, I have upgraded my springs as well as my trigger job on here, but you're going to notice a little bit stiff on here. Again, you're just going to have to ask yourself a question, especially in double action pull, if that's okay for you. Another thing is it comes with a lanyard ring. I don't personally care for the lanyard ring, and I don't think 99.9% of Americans really need one either. But the good thing is at least it sits above the bottom of my mag plate, and worst case, if I need to, I can always change this out with a flush mainspring holder. The other thing about the sights, as I talked about earlier, is that these are really good sights, but they're not great sights. They're good day sights. They're okay night sights, not what I would typically prefer. If you're one of these people that's really hung up on your ability to fire this at night and be able to see through here very effectively, you might want to make an upgrade to these sights. But if you're one of these people that just typically shoots during the day most of the time and you like a good three-dot system, these might suffice for you as well. Now, the other thing I would tell you is, on CZs, and I've talked about this in my videos with my P-09 as well, I always recommend on CZs to not dry fire these at length without what are called a snap cap. And snap caps are basically just dummy rounds. And the reason why is the firing pin that rides in here has a firing pin retaining pin right here. It's a rolled pin that goes through, and it fits through a notch of the firing pin. And what happens is if you fire on an empty chamber, that firing pin is going to be slamming into this retaining pin. And over time, it can actually deform it. And you're going to have to change out the firing pin, which is not that big of a deal, but you want to try to avoid that. So my recommendation, especially if you have a CZ, is always, if you're not keeping it either loaded or carrying, but rather, you know, if you're dry firing or doing anything of that nature, always keep a snap cap in there. So that way, every time that you're doing dry firing or anything of that nature, you know that you're helping to protect that firing pin, roll pin, that retaining pin. You don't want to damage that if you can avoid it. And again, the easiest way to do that is by using snap caps on CZs. Now, who would like this handgun? The first thing is people who want a more refined handgun. A lot of people start out and buy simple guns like Glocks, for example, right? They're just pretty basic and they work, right? But they're basic and there's not a lot of refinement to them. And a lot of people, as they tend to own handguns, tend to want to move up or graduate up. And the simple analogy is, and I use, it's like owning a watch, right? If you want a simple basic watch that, you know, it's ultimately going to be reliable until time, then you can do that. And it's similar to a Glock, right? But you can either have a basic watch or you can refine ultimately to a Swiss watch, right? Where you're going to have, even though both are reliable and are going to be able to tell you time, the CZs just, you know, they look better. They're just beautiful handguns. They're more refined. They're a lot more comfortable, and they're just a pleasure to shoot compared to most other handguns that are out there today, especially for a lot of the starter guns like the Glocks. And that's where you're going to see a lot of people who shoot these are people that wanted to graduate or move up. And that's typically what I see a lot with the P-01s. You're also going to see people that, just as I alluded to earlier, they hate the Glock ergonomics, right? The blockiness of a Glock, you know, the blockiness of the frame, and then the grip and everything about the Glocks that a lot of people just don't like. If these are not comfortable for you to fire or to hold, etc., you're probably going to just fall in love with the ergonomics of this handgun, because once you pick them up and start firing, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Other people that would like these might be people that want just a safer carry option, right? The ability to have a double action pull initially, so they know every time they're holstering or carrying the gun, they're safe. There's not something that's going to catch in here and probably pull this trigger to the point where it's going to go off in your holster or wherever else that you might be carrying it. And then it gives you the trigger versatility of knowing that if you're lining up for more precise shots, you have that second option of a very nice light trigger pull. So again, it gives you an option you don't really have with striker fired pistols, which is a compromise between safety and performance. In this case, you have both, and that's one of the benefits of this single double action trigger system. But it does require a little bit of training, because you have to know after you're firing to let down the hammer once you're done before you reholster the handgun. And then the final people that would really like this are people that already own a CZ. And you know who these people are, and if you've owned a CZ, you know exactly what I'm talking about. People that own CZs tend to love them, and they tend to own more than one of them over time. And they are, because they are really, really good handguns. And those are the people that would typically love this as well. Ironically, the SP-01 has been the entry point for a lot of people that when they first buy a CZ will buy one of these. And as a result of that, it becomes a standard for all handguns that they have. I even know people that have owned an SP-01 and literally sold off their other handgun, because they're like, nothing just comes close to this as far as total performance of the handgun. So as for me, the SP-01 is such an important handgun that is literally in my regular carry rotation. And this is literally the standard by which I judge all single double action guns today. Now, I've reviewed other ones that are out there, the P-09, the 2022 SIG, etc. There are pros and cons. But to me, this is the standard by which they are all judged, because quite honestly, even though it's almost 50 years old as the original design, this is a refinement of that design. This is still, in my opinion, one of the best handguns that are out there, if not, some people would claim, the best 9mm handgun that is out in the market today. Now, the only thing I would leave this with is, this is a review of the Omega series, as I talked about with the Omega trigger. In my opinion, CZ made a mistake a year ago when they discontinued the Omega version of this. And the reason why is they continued to put the Omega triggers in their 07 and 09s, but then they discontinued them in the P-01s. Now, those people that want a better, more refined option, as I alluded to earlier, they can buy the Shadow 2, which basically is P-01 at almost twice the price. And it's not as safe to carry, and you only have a single action option. You don't have a decocker option. So, some people like the standard trigger, which is fine. If you find one without an Omega with a standard trigger, you can still upgrade these, as I talked about before. You can get kits to upgrade them, or you can send them off to have them upgraded. But, you know, in my opinion, the Omega system was really great to begin with, and they already use it in the other models, and I don't know why they went away from it. Maybe CZ will change their mind and get smart on this one and go back and offering these Omega models as well, because to me this is the absolute best configuration for a P-01 that I've at least shot and I've found out there. So that's a review of the CZ P-01 Omega Compact. If you like this video or like this channel, please subscribe on YouTube, and thanks for watching.